Picture a small group of ancient humans gathered around a campfire as darkness settles over the landscape. The flames crackle softly while the smell of burning wood drifts through the cool night air. Then, something unexpected happens. Someone tosses a handful of dried leaves onto the fire. Within seconds, the air changes. A thick ribbon of smoke rises, carrying an unfamiliar scent. One person leans closer. Another waves it toward their face. They cough. Their eyes water. Everyone laughs nervously. It looks like a failed experiment. But the next night they do it again, and then again. Why? At first glance, it doesn't make much sense. Smoke stings your eyes, irritates your lungs, and disappears into the sky within moments. For people struggling to survive predators, hunger, and brutal weather, wasting precious plants on a fire seems almost impossible to justify. Yet, scattered across ancient campsites, caves, and forgotten settlements, archaeologists keep finding clues suggesting this wasn't an accident. Different groups, separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years, repeatedly placed certain plants into flames on purpose. What were they noticing that we can't see? Were they chasing strange smells? Trying to keep insects away? Discovering medicine by accident? Or had they stumbled onto something far more mysterious? Something capable of changing the way a human mind experienced the world itself? The deeper researchers dig, the stranger the story becomes. Because turning plants into smoke wasn't simply about making fire more interesting, it may have been the beginning of one of humanity's oldest and most surprising relationships with the natural world. The simplest answer seems almost too obvious. Ancient humans didn't begin burning plants because they wanted to change their minds. They were simply trying to survive. Imagine sleeping beside a river thousands of years ago. As the sun disappears, mosquitoes swarm the camp. Fleas hide in animal skins. Thick clouds of biting insects emerge from the grass. Without modern shelters or insect repellent, a single night could leave an entire group covered in painful bites, or worse, exposed to diseases carried by insects. Then someone notices something curious. When certain branches or dried herbs are thrown into the fire, the insects begin to disappear. That small observation could have changed everything. Even today, many plants naturally produce powerful aromatic compounds when burned. Juniper, sage, mugwort, cedar, and countless local species release strong-smelling smoke that insects dislike. Around the world, traditional communities have used this simple trick for centuries to protect camps, homes, and livestock. But insects weren't the only problem. The scent of smoke could also help preserve food, dry animal hides, drive pests away from stored supplies, and even mask human odor from curious predators. Suddenly, burning particular plants wasn't wasting valuable resources. It was making survival a little easier. At first, that explanation seems to fit perfectly. Every practical benefit gives us another reason why ancient people kept experimenting with different plants. But then archaeologists started finding something that didn't quite belong. Some of the burned plants discovered at ancient campsites offered almost no practical advantage at all. They weren't especially useful for repelling insects or preserving food. In fact, a few would have produced effects that were anything but practical. If survival was the only goal, why did people keep choosing those plants too? That question opens the door to a much deeper mystery. For a long time, many researchers believed the story ended there. Ancient people, they argued, burned plants because they were useful. The smoke chased away insects, preserved food, and made camps safer. It was a practical solution to practical problems. That explanation made sense, until the evidence refused to cooperate. As archaeologists uncovered older campsites across Europe, Asia, Africa, and the Americas, a strange pattern began to emerge. Tiny fragments of burned seeds, leaves, bark, and flowers kept appearing in places where they didn't seem necessary. Some were found deep inside caves. Others lay beside carefully built hearths that had clearly been used over and over again. Even more puzzling, many of these plants weren't growing nearby. Someone had traveled to collect them, carried them back, dried them, and then deliberately fed them to the fire. Think about that for a second. For people who spent most of their lives searching for food, water, and shelter, every journey cost energy. Every unnecessary task carried a risk. So why invest so much effort in plants that offered little obvious survival value? Then another clue appeared. Researchers noticed that many of these same plants shared something unusual. When heated, They released rich, fragrant smoke filled with natural chemicals capable of affecting the senses. Some sharpened alertness, others created a feeling of calm. A few produced sensations that must have seemed almost impossible to explain. Suddenly, the fire looked less like a cooking tool and more like a laboratory. What if ancient humans weren't just discovering which plants burned best? What if they were slowly learning that fire could unlock hidden properties locked inside those plants? Properties invisible until the flames released them. If that was true, the next mystery became impossible to ignore. How could anyone living thousands of years ago have discovered something so remarkably specific in the first place? That question lingered for decades. How could ancient people possibly know which plants were worth throwing into a fire without any knowledge of chemistry, biology, or medicine? Researchers eventually decided to approach the mystery from a different angle. Instead of asking what ancient humans believed, they asked what they actually did. The investigation began at prehistoric campsites where fireplaces had remained undisturbed for thousands of years. Archaeologists carefully sifted through layers of ash no thicker than a fingernail, collecting tiny pieces of charcoal, burned seeds, and microscopic plant remains. Most looked ordinary at first, but once the samples were analyzed, an unexpected pattern emerged. The same types of plants kept appearing again and again, not randomly, but repeatedly at different sites separated by vast distances and long stretches of time. This wasn't the signature of people burning whatever happened to be lying on the ground. It looked like deliberate selection. That discovery changed the entire conversation. Imagine standing beside one of those ancient fires. Night after night, generation after generation, someone was making the same choice. They had no written language to record recipes, no laboratories to test ideas, and no textbooks to explain what worked. Yet somehow, knowledge was being passed from one person to another with remarkable consistency. It suggested that these experiments weren't accidents. They were traditions. And traditions usually survive only when people believe they matter. But here was the part that puzzled researchers the most. If these communities had learned which plants created special kinds of smoke, who had taught the very first person? Was it blind luck after thousands of failed attempts? Careful observation over countless generations? Or did one extraordinary moment around an ordinary campfire reveal something no one had ever expected to experience? The answer may lie not in the plants themselves, but in the curious minds watching the flames. To understand how this knowledge survived, it helps to imagine one person whose name has been lost forever. Picture a young woman living nearly 10,000 years ago in a small hunter-gatherer camp. She isn't the strongest hunter or the fastest runner. Instead, she's the one who notices patterns that everyone else overlooks. She remembers which berries made people sick and which healed a fever. She knows where certain flowers bloom after the spring rains. While others search for game, she quietly collects leaves, roots, and seeds, filling woven baskets with plants that seem ordinary to everyone else. One evening as the campfire burns low, she tosses a handful of dried herbs into the flames. The smoke that rises is different. Children stop coughing. The relentless insects drift away. The air fills with a scent unlike the harsh smell of burning wood. Around the fire, people begin talking more softly. Some stare into the glowing embers as if the smoke itself has changed the mood of the night. Was it coincidence? She doesn't know. But she remembers. The next time she finds the same plant, she gathers it again. Months later, others begin copying her. Before long, no one can remember who first discovered the strange effect. It simply becomes something the group has always done. That may be how some of humanity's oldest traditions were born, not through a single dramatic breakthrough, but through thousands of quiet observations made by people whose names disappeared into history. And this wasn't unique to one camp. Across continents, countless tribes were making similar discoveries, each adding another piece to a puzzle no single generation could ever solve. Which raises an even bigger question. If isolated groups kept reaching the same conclusions, were they all uncovering the same hidden secret buried inside the natural world? At this point, it would be easy to think this was the story of one clever tribe. It wasn't. The same pattern began appearing almost everywhere humans settled. In the deserts of Australia, Aboriginal communities burned aromatic plants during ceremonies that had been passed down for countless generations. Across the forests of North America, indigenous peoples carefully selected cedar, sage, and sweetgrass, believing different plants carried different purposes. Thousands of miles away, Ancient Egyptians filled temples with fragrant resins, while in China and India, herbs were placed onto hot coals during healing rituals and religious gatherings. None of these civilizations were connected when many of these traditions began, yet somehow they reached remarkably similar conclusions. Think about that. Different languages, different climates, different beliefs, and still people kept discovering that certain plants became something entirely new once fire transformed them into smoke. Even the natural world hints at the same pattern. Animals have been seen seeking out unusual plants for reasons that go beyond simple nutrition. Elephants have been observed eating specific leaves before giving birth. Chimpanzees sometimes swallow rough medicinal plants to fight parasites. Birds weave aromatic herbs into their nests to reduce insects. They don't understand chemistry, but they recognize results. Humans took that instinct one extraordinary step further. We didn't just use plants. We learned to change them. By drying them, crushing them, mixing them, and finally exposing them to fire, ancient people unlocked properties that remained hidden inside living leaves. Fire became more than a source of warmth. It became a tool of discovery. And that's when the story grows even larger. Because if people across the world kept repeating the same experiments, perhaps they weren't simply searching for comfort or protection. Maybe they were all chasing the same invisible experience, one that connected medicine, ritual, memory, and the human mind itself. And if that's true, what exactly was hiding inside the smoke that made generation after generation refuse to let the tradition disappear? But if burning plants was such a valuable discovery, why didn't every ancient culture do it in exactly the same way? That's where the story takes another unexpected turn. Archaeologists have uncovered entire settlements where very little evidence of aromatic or medicinal plants appears in the fire remains. These communities clearly mastered fire, cooked food, and survived for generations, yet they seem to have ignored practices that neighboring groups embraced. Why may have been geography. A tribe living on open grasslands had access to very different plants than people surrounded by dense forests or mountain valleys. If a useful species didn't grow nearby, the tradition may never have developed, or it evolved in a completely different direction. Culture mattered too. Some societies treated fragrant smoke as an everyday tool, others reserved it for rare moments, a healing ceremony, a burial, the arrival of a child, or the changing of the seasons. The same smoke that signaled comfort in one community could symbolize something sacred in another. Then there are the plants themselves. Not every experiment ended well. Some species released harmless aromas, while others produced toxic fumes that could cause dizziness, illness, or even death. Ancient people had no chemical formulas to guide them. Every new plant carried a risk, and every mistake became a lesson that was remembered or forgotten. Those exceptions reveal something important. There was never a single universal recipe passed from one civilization to another. Instead, countless communities conducted their own slow experiments with nature, each discovering different pieces of the puzzle. Which leads to the biggest mystery of all. What if the greatest discovery wasn't any particular plant, but humanity's realization that fire could unlock an entirely invisible world hidden inside them? So, how did ancient humans turn plants into smoke? The surprising answer is that they didn't begin with a grand plan. They began with curiosity. Somewhere tens of thousands of years ago, someone noticed that fire didn't simply destroy plants, it transformed them. The moment a leaf, root, resin, or flower met the flames, it released something that had been trapped inside all along. Invisible oils became drifting scents. Hidden chemicals filled the air. The plant became something entirely different. Most animals would have walked away. Humans leaned closer. That single difference changed history. Generation after generation, people repeated the same simple cycle. Observe, remember, experiment, and teach. If one plant kept insects away, they passed that knowledge to their children. If another eased a cough, it became part of healing traditions. If a fragrant resin made ceremonies feel more powerful or helped people enter a reflective state, it became woven into ritual and belief. Without realizing it, they were building one of humanity's earliest scientific traditions. Not science written in books, but science stored in memory. Every successful experiment survived because it worked. Every failure quietly disappeared. Across thousands of years, those small discoveries accumulated into a vast library of knowledge carried entirely in human minds. And that's the deeper story hidden beneath the title. Ancient humans didn't merely learn how to burn plants, they discovered that fire could reveal qualities invisible to the naked eye. Long before anyone understood molecules, essential oils, or airborne compounds, they had already learned that heat could unlock properties hidden within nature. Fire became more than warmth. It became a bridge between observation and understanding, between the physical world and the unseen one. That's why the tradition spread across continents, survived countless generations, and appeared again and again in civilizations that never met each other. In the end, smoke wasn't the real discovery. It was evidence of something far more remarkable. The moment humans realized that nature still held secrets waiting to be uncovered, and that curiosity, more than strength or speed, might become our greatest survival tool. Now return to that quiet campfire where this story began. The flames still dance beneath the night sky. A handful of dried leaves falls into the fire, and a ribbon of fragrant smoke slowly rises into the darkness. Around it, a small group of ancient humans watches in silence. They have no idea they're witnessing the beginning of a tradition that will outlive kingdoms, religions, and even entire civilizations. To them, it's just another evening. To history, it's the start of something extraordinary. Because that moment was never really about smoke. It was about the human instinct to notice what others ignore, to ask why one plant smelled different from another, to remember what worked, to share that knowledge, and then to improve it, one generation at a time. Every civilization that followed inherited that same way of thinking. The tools became more advanced, the questions became more complicated. But the habit never changed. We still gather around different kinds of fires today, laboratories instead of campfires, microscopes instead of glowing embers, searching for hidden answers inside the natural world. Perhaps that's what truly separates humans from every other species. Not that we learned to control fire, but that once the smoke began to rise, we couldn't stop wondering what invisible secrets were rising with it. And that simple act of curiosity may have shaped civilization just as profoundly as the flames themselves.